Welcome to your Canadiens Connection on Rocket Sports Radio. We are proud to be the trusted source for all things Habs for more than a decade. This is the Canadiens Connection Podcast. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained all about the Montreal Canadiens' entire organization. Welcome to the show. My name is Amy Johnson. I'm going to be your host today and each week. This is episode 334 of the Canadiens Connection podcast. So whether it's your first episode or your 334th, we're glad that you are here with us today. And I'm also very glad to be joined in the studio by my co-host each and every week. He's the founder and president of Rocket Sports. His name's Rick Stevens. How you doing today?
Doing great. You must be. Are you getting nervous? Are you anxious? Are you excited? Of course, Super Bowl weekend, which means a couple of games, couple of matinees at the Bell Center, but it also means that your Philadelphia Eagles going up against Kansas City Chiefs for the Super Bowl.
Once again, back in the Super Bowl. As is the case for me this is now like the third time in the last...
Rub it, yeah.
No, I know that they've gotten there. I get more, I don't know, anxious, and to me, it's not exciting. It's stressful.
Okay.
Because I just assume that things are going to go very poorly. And so, yes, I'm excited that they're there. I can't wait to watch the game. But I'm anxious about it. We'll see. I'm nervous.
Well, it should be. Most of our listeners will be tuning in, whether they're Chiefs fans or Eagles fans or just football fans, or I see that some of the Super Bowl ads have started to leak out, and of course some people just watch the Super Bowl for the ads. So should be a great day overall, and a great weekend if you're a fan of the Montreal Canadiens with as I said, 2 matinee games. Absolutely, we're gonna get things moving here so that we can get you to those matinee games if you're listening to the podcast over the weekend. We're going to give you a brief recap on the games that took place throughout the week this week, get you all up to date on roster news, injury news, and some trade speculation that's been flying around by some of the national analysts and pundits. We're going to dip into the Habs prospect report and get you some updates on how some of the top Habs prospects are doing, including the Laval Rocket as well. We've got some great quotes of the week this week from 2 pretty dynamic forwards for the Canadiens, Owen Beck and Cole Caulfield. You're going to want to hear from both of them. And then we'll wrap up the first segment with some general notes around the NHL in general. Before we break for our first commercial and get you all set up for segment 2, which is our big topic this week. The name of today's episode is Are Injuries Derailing the Habs? Breaking down the impact of Guhle and Heineman's absences. And so in the second segment, we have our resident medical consultant, Dr. Stephen Morris. He is joining us once again on the show today for a deep dive into talking, of course, a little bit more in depth about what could be going on with Kaiden Guhle's injury, what could be going on with Emil Heineman's injury, as well as some other injury recovery processes on the Montreal Canadiens. He's going to give us his medical insight on the types of injuries that have been sustained, what typical recovery is like for them, prognoses, that kind of thing. So it's going to be a very, very interesting second segment that you're going to want to stick around for. And then, of course, in our final segment, we're going to let you have your say, and we are going to hear from you. We had some great responses to last week's Canadiens Connection question of the week. And as always, we encourage you to submit your answers to that question each and every week, each and every episode. And then we go through and select the best responses and read them on the following week's show. And that's what we're going to do for you
towards the end of today's show. And we've got a great question for you today to answer for next week. So if you would like to be part of the conversation and join the interactive portion of this podcast, the best way to do that is sending us a text at 5853-ROCKET. Once again, that's 5853-ROCKET. You can also leave us a comment on our YouTube channel, which you can find InsideTheCanadiens.com, or just drop us a reply or a DM on social media at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So in terms of game recaps, let's go back to this quick little California road trip that the Canadiens took last week, starting with a trip to Anaheim to play the Ducks. And the Habs kicked things off in that game pretty well. They had a nice 2-0 lead for the first half of the game. The worst lead in hockey, I suppose, is why they call it that, because then they gave up 3 unanswered. And they dropped that game to Anaheim 3-2.
Sam Montembeault starting this game. And why? He's, a bad goal or two in this game. But as you said, started off great. And we should say 3 games in California against, starting off the trip against the Ducks and the Sharks, 2 of the worst teams in the National Hockey League. Minimum, the Canadiens should come away with in this road trip 4 points. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. A loss to the Ducks, which is big. I mean, the Ducks only managed 22 shots in the game. Started off good. A shorthanded goal by Yoel Armia. Christian Dvorak then on the power play. Yes, I read that correctly. Christian Dvorak on the power play. Then gave up goals to McTavish for Toronto, and Alex Killorn, Montreal's own. Well, he was born in Halifax, but he grew up in Montreal. Alex Killorn from Montreal, Habs killer, with the winning goal halfway through the third period for the Ducks, and they go away with a 3-2 win. Bad start to that California road trip.
Bad start, but 2 nights later, they were back at it again, this time in San Jose, playing the Sharks. Once again, just like the Anaheim game, their opposition put up 3 goals against them, but this time the Habs were able to endure and get 1 more than the Sharks did. They won this one 4-3, mostly due to special teams.
Yeah, this was all about special teams, power play goals. For both teams, shorthanded goal, Yoel Armia again with the shorty. That actually turned out to be the game winner. And the Canadiens a bit fortunate in this. There was a goal in second period, Zetterlund, clearly a goal, but it was waved off on the ice. It was under Sam Montembeault's pad. His pad was clearly behind the post in the net. Couldn't determine it after a very long review. Waved off. Very fortunate there, but just a minute later, Colin Graff with his first NHL goal for San Jose beat Montembeault glove side. To say that once too often. But the Canadiens, by the skin of their teeth, were able to get the victory here against the league's worst team.
So that brought them the very next night. Remember, this was a kind of a midweek back-to-back. They played in San Jose on Tuesday night, turned right around Wednesday night to play in LA and face the Kings. This time it was Montreal that put 3 up on the board. They did manage to find the back of the net 3 times, but LA doubled that and put up 6 against them in an absolutely dominant game over the Montreal Canadiens.
Now, one of the Kings broadcasters said, most shots by any team in the first minute of a game. I don't know if that's true. But the first 99 seconds of this game, the Los Angeles Kings peppered Jakub Dobeš with 8 shots and already had a goal. Not Dobeš's fault, but this was absolutely dominant. 7 minutes into the game, the shots were 12-1 for the Los Angeles Kings. The Canadiens were awful in this. Now they showed some fight, coming back and trying to, getting a goal, but here and there. But it seemed that as soon as the Canadiens scored, the Kings replied, and it really wasn't all that close. Should say that at this game there was a ton of scouts, 19 scouts by all accounts, and watching and probably mostly the Montreal Canadiens, of course. Logan Mailloux was in this game. He scored his second goal of the season. Owen Beck was in this game. I should say Owen Beck had a spectacular game against the San Jose Sharks. He was really good. But this was pretty dominating. 37 shots overall by the Los Angeles Kings, and you had to feel for Jakub Dobeš. We've mentioned this before, and it's been a simple fact that in every case where the Canadiens have a couple of games lined up, Jakub Dobeš gets the tougher start in every single case. And this one, it was just silly because Montembeault gets the two teams at the bottom of the standings, the absolute bottom, and
in Anaheim and San Jose.
And Dobeš, they throw Dobeš in. First of all, it was the Canadiens' third game in 4 nights, and talk about fatigue or being out of juice, definitely out of juice. So, but also, the LA Kings have the league's best home record. They're 16-3-1. And going into that game, they were 10-1-0 in their last 11 home games. So you're just throwing Dobeš to the wolves in this one. What it says to me is Marty does not have confidence in Sam Montembeault. Marty St. Louis is sheltering, to use a term they usually use on the skaters, is sheltering Sam Montembeault. And
it's happening again this weekend too, because Montembeault's getting the start against New Jersey. Dobeš is getting the start against Tampa.
Yeah, and in that case, they're two pretty even teams in the standings. But again, Dobeš gets the back half of the back-to-back. Right. And, going back to last year, Canadiens 1 win in 13 in the back-to-back. So, yeah, sheltering Montembeault. And so I just say, don't ask us to buy into the illusion that Sam Montembeault is somehow a legitimate number one goaltender in the NHL. That's all I'll say about that.
So this means this statistic doesn't get any better week to week recently. That is 6 losses for Montreal in the last 7 games. Their only win was the one against San Jose that they eked out 1 extra goal over San Jose. And so that has dropped them now to 7th in the Atlantic and 22nd in the NHL with just 55 points so far on the season.
Montreal Canadiens with a 3.8% chance of making the playoffs. They're not making the playoffs. On pace for an 83-point season. Still a relatively easy schedule. 28th in strength of schedule. That means they're near the bottom. Means an easy schedule with 28 games remaining on that schedule.
And be sure, if you haven't done so already, make sure you're following at Rocket Sports on X and on Facebook, and make sure that that way you keep in touch and keep up to date with everything going on with the Canadiens, both in-game score updates as well as links to any of our written content appearing on our Substack or on hockeybuzz.com. In terms of roster news, Rick mentioned this already. It was kind of the all over California tour for Owen Beck and Logan Mailloux this week. They were already on their way to California to attend the AHL All-Star festivities being held in Palm Desert. Coachella Valley was hosting. However, they were recalled by the Canadiens at the last minute, so that meant that they went to Anaheim with the Canadiens. They did not play in that game. The next day, they were sent back down to the AHL so that they could scoot just down the California coast to get down to the AHL All-Star game. They missed the skills competition, but they participated in the All-Star game. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then turned around as soon as the All-Star festivities were done, and they were recalled back to Montreal again in time for them to play in San Jose on Tuesday night. So it was kind of a lot of travel for Beck and Mailloux. Beck, as Rick mentioned, absolutely excellent game in San Jose, and quite frankly in the game against the Kings as well. He's just he's looking quite comfortable in his role on the wing.
Yep, played those 2 games, and on the wing, playing the wing on the third line. We should say Patrick Laine demoted to the fourth line. Patrick Laine with Jake Evans and Yoel Armia. And that bumped Josh Anderson up to play with Newhook and Doc, which resulted in Owen Beck being on the Canadiens' third line, playing the wing. He brought energy. He was very physical on the forecheck, created turnovers. He was creative, hit the post, almost got a goal. Smart, really good reads. He looked very comfortable in the game. As far as Logan Mailloux, played against Los Angeles in place of Jaden Struble. Struble, he had that quick stop, conditioning stop in Laval, and has looked a little better. But he really, to me, struggles with consistency. And I'm not talking necessarily game to game, but shift to shift. Mailloux was hardly used in the first 40 minutes against the Kings, and then had a boatload of ice time in the third period when they were looking for offense, and he can certainly provide that. Had a great goal, wicked wrist shot, scoring his second goal of the season.
As I mentioned, Sam Montembeault is actually going to be the one who's going to start on Saturday, the 1 o'clock matinee at the Bell Center against the New Jersey Devils. Jakub Dobeš will be the one getting the start between the pipes on Sunday against Tampa Bay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as far as if we're talking about roster news, there's lots of scuttlebutt that after that start on Sunday, that it's likely that Jakub Dobeš will be sent to the Laval Rocket for the duration of the Four Nations break, so that he can get some starts down there, and then we'll see what happens after the break to see whether Dobeš will be recalled again, and has certainly deserved it, or Kaiden Primo, who's been excellent while he's been in Laval.
That'll be an interesting dynamic because obviously, yes, Dobeš has done very well at the NHL level. He was doing very well at the AHL level. Primo struggled mightily at the NHL level, has not lost a game since he has been sent down to Laval. I believe he's now 9-0, 10-0, something like that. They just won again on Friday night against Toronto. So that's going to be interesting to see those two if they are, in fact, in Laval together for a little bit. Speaking of scuttlebutt, as we get closer and closer to the First Nations break, which has sort of, for all intents and purposes, become a miniature trade deadline, like the pre-trade trade deadline. There's lots of talk heating up, and Kevin Weeks had some thoughts and speculations and things out this week that the Canadiens might be interested in Sabres forward Dylan Cozens, with Jake Evans and Christian Dvorak set to go UFA in the summer. Dylan Cozens, perhaps. Now,
there was a bit of a laundry list of teams that were mentioned by Weeks as having interest in Dylan Cozens. Why wouldn't you? Sabres, they're not going to let him go for cheap. They're reportedly looking for a comparable player at center, a top 4 right shot defenseman, or an elite NHL prospect ready to step in. There's a number of players. Cozens is one. Trevor Zegras has been linked to the Canadiens. Casey Middlestat from Colorado he was in many of the articles by the Montreal media this past week as being linked to the Canadiens. So the trade talk is heating up.
Absolutely, it is. Elliot Friedman has put his 2 cents in this week's 32 Thoughts, saying, quote, "There's a lot of focus on Jake Evans in Montreal, but do not discount Yoel Armia. His play is not going unnoticed."
Very good penalty killer, physical player, 2 shorthanded goals this week. Yes, Yoel Armia is in demand as well.
And Frank Saravelli says that it's believed that the Capitals offered a second-round pick for Evans at last year's draft. And there's now, a laundry list of teams that are interested in Jake Evans as well, including the Capitals still in there. The Devils, who the Canadiens are playing later on Saturday, the Maple Leafs, and the Blue Jackets.
It's interesting because we'll see what happens in these 2 matinee games before the break. But the Canadiens have essentially worked themselves out of the playoff talk, and we heard Kent Hughes saying his level of activity at the trade deadline is going to be dependent on where his team is. He said his players will dictate his actions, and right now it's looking like the Canadiens will not be involved in the playoffs.
All right, that is covers kind of the roster news and potential trade updates. Let's now turn our focus to the Habs prospects.
It's time for the Rocket Report. The Rocket Sports Media Team is your premier source for information about the Laval Rocket, the AHL affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens, as well as Habs prospects playing in the CHL, NCAA, and leagues around the world.
Canadiens prospect Rasmus Bergqvist, a defenseman for Skellefteå AIK, that's in the SHL, the Swedish Hockey League, has been loaned to Södertälje SK in Hockey Allsvenskan. That's
easy for you.
Yeah, I was going to say that was. I'm going to just take a mini bow that I got through that in one shot.
Well done.
Thanks.
Rasmus Bergqvist was selected this past draft, round 7, 224th by the Montreal Canadiens. Remember, we saw him at the World Juniors. He hadn't scored all year and scored a goal in the very first game for Sweden against Slovakia, I believe it was. He played 23 games this year in the SHL. Maybe, that wasn't the right league for him. Played 4 games in the under 20, the junior league in Sweden. Maybe he needed something in between, so he's been sent to Hockey Allsvenskan, and he's played 1 game there.
You know what time it is now. It is the Ivan Demidov update that we do every single week. It's getting to be boring news by now. He's the KHL Rookie of the Week for the 7th time this season. That's after being the SKA Player of the Month for January as well. That's in addition to the fact that he was the KHL Rookie of the Month for January and December, and I think October as well. That is the 2nd month in a row that he has been deemed the SKA Player of the Month. And he's just, he's on a tear. It's just not stopping now.
So 19 goals, 25 assists, 44 points in 52 games. And that's, he's averaging 13 minutes a game, a minute of power play time per game. And if you've been paying attention, 44 points, he now holds the KHL record for most points scored by an under 20 year of age player, eclipsing Kirill Kaprizov's 42 points in 2017. Just before we leave Demidov, because if that isn't enough news, he's at the KHL All-Star festivities, and do yourself a favor and look for the video of the shootout or whatever they're calling it, competition. He has an interesting take, which Amy, you should appreciate, because he does a bit of a twirl with the puck on his stick, and then he pitches his entire stick with the puck attached to the butt end at the goal, and unfortunately right off the crossbar. Puck, stick, the whole works.
It's a nice try.
Yeah.
Would have been more impressive if he got it in, but pretty good, to say the least. Logan Sawyer, remember that name? He has been named the Hockey East Rookie of the Week. And Rick, where is he playing again?
Providence Friars had 3 points last week. Remember Logan Sawyer, one of those Toronto area players, 18 years old, picked in the 2024 draft, third round pick, 78th overall by the Montreal Canadiens.
Right. Prospect rankings continue to roll out. We've got two different sets of prospect rankings that we just want to touch on to see how things have shifted around. The first is Scott Wheeler over at The Athletic, where he's got the Canadiens organizational prospects ranked third in the NHL.
Overall. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then Scott goes through and ranks the Canadiens prospects individually within the organization, has Demidov as the Canadiens' top prospect. No surprise there. What is causing a bit of chatter is the number 2 prospect, according to Scott Wheeler, is Jacob Fowler, who Scott says is pretty much a can't miss a goaltender, Reinbacher, the third best Canadiens prospect. Michael Hage, and then Logan Mailloux. That is your top 5. Demidov, Fowler, Reinbacher, Hage, and Mailloux.
Interesting. Craig Button on TSN came out with his top 50 NHL-affiliated prospects, and the Canadiens have 3 on that list.
They do, including the number 1 overall, Ivan Demidov. Craig says he's brilliant, creative, skilled, competitive. He moves the needle. So of his top 50 NHL prospects, he has Ivan Demidov at number 1. Jacob Fowler, Craig likes him too, at 13. And the third member of the Canadiens, Michael Hage, at number 41.
I think I have to... I know I don't always say this very often, but I think I have to agree with Craig's, the 3 that he's included in his top 50 there. Switching gears to the AHL and the prospects playing for the Laval Rocket. Laval just keeps chugging along. They beat the Hartford Wolfpack last week in overtime. Florian Jacki with a big OT winner in that one. As well as Laval then... I mentioned this a few minutes ago. They played on Friday night against Toronto, downing the Marlies 5-2 in the Marlies barn. First professional hat trick for Sean Farrell. He was the AHL's first star league-wide last night, which is pretty significant.
Slow start for Farrell and noticed by Canadiens fans, but he's up to 9 goals on the season. He's taken a jump and on a bit of a roll. Laval Rockets' top goal scorer is still Jared Davidson with 16 goals this season.
Jared Davidson had a little tilt last night as well, so he's been all sorts of involved. As I said, Kaiden Primo hasn't lost a game yet since being sent down. In fact, that earned him the accolade of being the AHL goaltender of the month for the month of January. In January, with an 8-0-0 record. And I think, though the numbers that he's got for his goals against and save percentage, Rick, are probably ones that he would have liked to have had in the NHL, but not shabby at all getting them in the AHL.
10 wins in the AHL. And listen, maybe Kaiden Primo, some think it's true. Marty Biron being one, that Kaiden Primo is an excellent AHL goaltender, but doesn't have the chops to make it to the NHL. We'll see if he gets another opportunity.
That leaves the Rocket with 61 points on the season so far. They are sitting at the top of the North Division. That's not anything new. They've been there quite a bit recently. However, it also has bumped them to being the top team in the AHL. That's right. They are sitting at first overall in the entire league. So I think that's pretty good.
Kudos to Pascal Vincent.
Absolutely. What a difference a coach can make, right? The Trois-Rivières Lions, the ECHL affiliate for the Montreal Canadiens, they also have continued their winning ways, beating Maine 4-2 on February 1st. They did drop a 6-2 decision to Savannah on the 6th this week, but they turned right around the next night playing Jacksonville with a 3-2 victory. So they are still sitting in third place overall in the ECHL. Once again, yet another farm team for the Montreal Canadiens, still continuing to find some decent success. We talked a little bit about Owen Beck and the back and forth that he's had this week, the success he's had in Laval this year, and the success he's had this week in the 2 games he played for the Montreal Canadiens. Playing on Tuesday against San Jose, he was on the third line with Christian Dvorak and Brendan Gallagher, and had this to say after the game.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think, there's a lot of good players, in that All-Star game. And, like you said, it is at the end of the day just an All-Star game. But to be able to bury a couple, I guess, always feels good no matter what the circumstances. So, yeah, I think that carried over a little bit tonight. I was, just trying to positively affect the game as much as I could. And, had a couple good chances that unfortunately didn't go in.
Can we say it was your best game in the NHL so far?
I'd say so, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so
I'd
too.
say so.
Modestly, he agreed. But he had 3 goals in that All-Star game. He didn't mention that. And then had 2 good games for Montreal. He's looking real good.
He is. Now, this next clip that we're going to hear is coming from Cole Caulfield. And it's something, I wasn't going to touch on it last week. In fact, I think I said something to the effect last week of, I'm not going to say anything more about this because I might say something not nice. But over the last week, the trend has continued that due to political situations on either side of the Canadian-U.S. border, the Star-Spangled Banner has started to be booed at NHL games. Happened in Montreal, which really ticked me off. Then it happened in Ottawa. It happened in Calgary. It happened in Vancouver. And first of all, if you're new to the show, I am American. So I don't take kindly to anyone booing our anthem. I certainly wouldn't condone any American booing any other country's anthem. I look down on it altogether. I have a lot of family with military history, and it's just, for me, it's just disrespectful to the nations. It doesn't need to be done at sporting events. And the other thing that doesn't make sense to me about it is, there's a lot of regardless of what side of the border you're on, there's a lot of Americans and or Canadians playing on the team that you support. And how do you think they feel when you boo their anthem? Well, someone asked Cole Caulfield that this week, and here's what he said.
I think the national anthems are huge for the troops that have fought for each country there. And for me personally, I stay out of that. We play hockey. We're trying to do our job. The fans come to watch the game. Just be respectful, I think, and just remember those who have come before you.
Don't be disrespectful. Great message by Cole Caulfield. Also, he reminds everyone what the anthems are about. They're about the heroes, the military heroes that fought for our countries. And there's no need to insert your own personal political views in this kind of form. There's plenty of places you can go and complain, but whatever your beef is, the anthems before a sporting event, a National Hockey League game, not the place at all. And listen, if you need any more reasons, Four Nations is coming up. Players will be playing for their countries. Starts in Montreal, but listen, if Montreal fans start booing anthems, it goes to Boston, and they're not going to take too kindly to that. If you need any more reasons, Premier Francois Legault said he's going to be at the Bell Center Saturday afternoon for the Canadiens game against New Jersey Devils. And his quote, I do not want the American national anthem to be booed, end quote. It's just dumb. Please don't do it.
Yeah.
And that's our public service announcement for the week.
Yes, let's just stop that immediately. One last twirl around news covering the entire NHL before we take our first break here on the show. Minnesota Wild's Ryan Hartman suspended for a whopping 10 games for a roughing incident on the Ottawa Senators' Tim Stützle.
Hartman has appealed that suspension, goes to Gary Bettman first, and then there's a second appeals mechanism to a mediator if that doesn't go his way. But Gary's pretty reluctant to.
Yeah, Gary doesn't overturn.
Yeah, he doesn't overturn many. And listen, the other part of this is that officials on the ice confirmed that Hartman was warned that he was. He was over the line a couple of times during that game, and yeah, the incident, if you've watched it, is pretty ugly.
The Vancouver Canucks didn't waste any time signing an extension to newly acquired defenseman Marcus Pettersson. Signed him to a 6-year contract extension worth $5.5 million a season.
Yep, and I think overall, lots of movement as we've been talking about the last few weeks, and for the most part, JT Miller is fitting in. The players on their new teams are fitting in pretty well.
I think they are so far. So that brings us to version 6.0 of Chris Johnston's NHL trade board on The Athletic. Who we got still sitting at the top of the list?
Number 1 is Brock Nelson of the Islanders, Rickard Rakell from Pittsburgh, Carson Soucy in Vancouver, Rasmus Ristolainen, Philadelphia. And number 5, we talked about him already, Dylan Cousins in Buffalo. Number 9, Casey Middlestat. We talked about him earlier, with the Canadiens having some interest, reportedly, in both of those players. As far as Canadiens players on the list, David Savard has actually moved up to number 12. He was 15 last week. Not ranked last week, but up to 18 is Yoel Armia. We talked about there's maybe some interest in him. And Jake Evans was 19 last week. He's moved down to 27, meaning that probably the Canadiens are hoping to hang on to Jake Evans.
Oh, it's getting interesting. It's getting interesting. All right. Well, we are going to take our first break here on the Canadiens Connection podcast. We've got for you right now a message from our sponsors over at DraftKings. This is for their brand new app called Pick Six. It's completely separate from their sportsbook app. This is DraftKings Pick Six. They have a special incentive for you just for Super Bowl weekend for you to sign up. So you're going to want to check that out here in just a second, and then stick around because in our big topic segment coming up after the break, are injuries derailing the Habs? Analyzing the impact with Dr. Stephen Morris. You don't want to miss it. You're listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast right here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Have you played Pick Six from DraftKings? What are you waiting for? You better get on it. It's Super Bowl 59, the last time to play NFL Pick Six this season. As the official daily fantasy sports partner of the NFL, DraftKings does fantasy sports like no one else. Play for better payouts on Pick Six. It's super easy to get started. Select 2 or more players, choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like touchdowns, yardage, sacks, and more. Pick Six is available in most states, including Missouri, California, Texas, Georgia, and more. And DraftKings is making it even sweeter for first-timers. New Pick Six customers play $5 to get $59 in Pick Six credits. Win more cash on Pick Six. Download the DraftKings Pick Six app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to play $5 and get $59 in Pick Six credits. Only on DraftKings Pick Six. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick Six not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick Six credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at picksix.draftkings.com/promos.
Welcome back to the Canadiens Connection podcast, right here on Rocket Sports Radio. Once again, my name is Amy Johnson. If you'd like to find me on X and follow my coverage over there, you can find me at Flyers Rule. And once again, with me in the studio is our president and founder of Rocket Sports. His name's Rick Stevens, and you do want to be sure you're following him and our whole crew in general at Rocket Sports on X. You can also follow this podcast at Habs Connection, X, Facebook, Instagram. And don't forget, hit subscribe over at CanadiensConnection.fm. Find your favorite podcast player and hit subscribe. And while you're at it, subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Now, it's been a little refreshing because unlike previous years, the Canadiens are not hanging around near the top of the NHL in terms of man games lost to injury this season. It's been a bit of a breath of fresh air to not be talking about injury after injury after injury after injury. However, two recent injuries to some pretty key players have really seemed to trigger a decline in the play of the Montreal Canadiens overall. And so to help all of us and all of our listeners understand the complexity of those injuries, in some cases, the surgical procedures that have been involved, and also to help kind of clarify the process of recovery, we're going to be joined right now in the studio by our medical consultant, Dr. Stephen Morris. All right. Well, I am very pleased to get to welcome back to the show once again today. It's been a little while since he's been here, and we are excited that he's here to chat with us today. And that is none other than Dr. Stephen Morris, medical consultant for Rocket Sports and the Canadiens Connection podcast. Now, Dr. Morris is a fellow of Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, and he has an established medical practice with a background in muscle physiology and human biomechanics. And he is just our go-to expert for all things medical here at Rocket Sports and Canadiens Connection. Dr. Morris, welcome back. We're glad to have you back here again.
Hey, Amy, thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on what is a lovely Saturday morning here in South Australia.
Yeah, how is it down under these days?
Oh, it's a lot nicer than home, I can tell you that much. I've been getting messages today about how there's 2 feet of snow up near Muskoka, and here it's about 24 degrees and sunny.
Yes, and in fact, there was a big snowstorm near Aurelia and nasty weather up in that direction. What we often say before one of your segments is, first of all, we're happy to regularly feature Dr. Morris here on the Canadiens Connection podcast, and he helps us discuss medical issues, performance issues about the Montreal Canadiens. However, Dr. Morris has not examined the players that we'll be discussing today. He's not seen their files. He's going to be relying on his extensive medical knowledge, his experienced comment on information that's publicly available. All that correct, Stephen?
Fully correct, yes.
All right. Listen, to get underway, just maybe if we can do an update, because I was thinking back, it was a year ago, December, the Canadiens Connection podcast, episode 274, was titled, "What's Wrong with Cole Caulfield?" And in that episode, Cole Caulfield was struggling. You described the injury, you described the surgery, and then talked about the length of time it takes for rehab, and you came armed with a couple of studies, and I'm going to paraphrase. It was a wonderful podcast. You had lots of information, but you basically said, be patient. Be patient until he fully recovers from the surgery and gets back to that baseline, that Cole Caulfield that we know. So were you right? Given the season, the bounce back season he's having, is everything going as you expected?
Well, look, I don't know if I would say that, come here and say I was right, but what I'll say is we could probably rename this podcast now "What Was Wrong with Cole Caulfield," because he looks pretty good now. I think that, we've seen exactly what we talked about at that time, Rick, which was even though you have these injuries, especially when it comes to the shoulder or the hip or the knee, and the joint itself can be functionally like really good. The strength is the same as the other side, and it's got good range of motion and all that stuff. It has to become part of the athlete again too. And I think what we've seen is the progression of not only confidence but also like the biomechanics of the whole body with the shot. And I think in lesser words we were right about what's going on. And he looks great. His shot looks great, and I think that the fact that he's on pace to clear 30 goals this year is a good sign of things to come.
Now, obviously, if we're speaking about injuries and the Canadiens at this exact moment of in time, the injury to Kaiden Guhle looms large. But before we get to Guhle, because I think that's probably the biggest injury on everyone's mind at the moment, just want to walk our audience through a couple of players and get some quick hits from you, maybe a few words on the potential injury situation regarding a few players. And I think, Rick, you wanted to start with one of the forwards.
What's wrong with Kirby Dach? Now, listen, this is probably more than a quick hit, but he returned from a lengthy absence, that devastating injury he had that kept him out all of last season. I guess just generally, do we need to be more patient like we were with Cole Caulfield, or is there something about this that feels a little bit different?
I'm glad you brought up Kirby first, actually. I think what we just talked about sets the table really well for Kirby, and they're different injuries. One is the ACL and the other one is a shoulder, but I think the idea stays the same. And there's two prongs of that recovery, like getting to the point where you can play hockey again is very different to playing hockey at the highest level that you can do it. But unfortunately, to get there, you actually have to play the games to get back to that point. Like, you don't just get to do some rehab and then go back to where you were. It's just not possible, especially with Kirby, like how much time you've missed, right? So you lose not only the spark in your game, but also fitness and game awareness and so many other things that, you have to get back. When you look at exactly as you sort of laid it out, when you look at Caulfield's like injury +1 season, we'll call it, so the year he returned, he was slow to start, and now in +2, he's looking good. And I think that I wouldn't be surprised to see the same progression with Kirby. I think, as I pointed out, mechanically his left leg is probably, or his leg is probably fine. But the way that it fits into how he plays the game and how he strides and how he balances in the corners and takes contact, that still all has to come, just like we've seen with Cole's shot. So, does he have stiffness after games? Does he have swelling after games? Probably a bit more than he would have ever before. But I doubt that's what's stopping him. I think it's more just putting together a previously injured knee back into the system of how he plays the game, as well as getting that psychological confidence over the year's time. So I'm not ready to judge him quite yet. Contrary to what probably most discourse is, I think he's actually pretty promising still, and I would wait until the end of next year to really cast my judgment there. I mean, looking at him, I think he has something like 13 points in the last 20 games. So he's been finding those strides, but I think it's been under the radar relative to some of the other things that are going on with the Habs.
Now, if there ever was like a shroud of mystery around a player and an injury, what's going on with Emil Heineman has to be right on the money for that. When it first happened, the Canadiens announced that Heineman wasn't going to play because he was involved in a vehicular accident. News then quickly came out shortly afterwards that he was a pedestrian who was struck by a vehicle. Not a whole lot has really come out about it since then. The reports are that he has a wrist fracture, but we don't actually have a confirmation of that from the Montreal Canadiens. The unfortunate part is Emil Heineman was having a superb season. He was humming right along, was a very strong part of the forward core. And with his absence, that kind of marked the beginning of when the Canadiens started to sputter. They started to lose some footing. They started to lose some confidence for sure. And it all seems to be kind of tied together. If it is something involving Heineman's wrist, how much would that affect? He's got a really wickedly powerful wrist shot. He's got a surprisingly keen shot. What are your thoughts around the potentials for what could be going on with Emil Heineman and his recovery?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Amy, about the way the team changed when they lost him. I think that's so true. If you watch games closely, you really realize that. It's funny, he doesn't have to play on the first line for that, but it's just he makes such an important role. Look, from looking at the info that we have, which is exactly as you said, it's very limited. But I've seen projected timeline of something like 3 to 4 weeks. And for me, that's in keeping with, it's probably a ligamentous injury of the wrist. So he's probably, you could either get struck by the car, fall, and land on your wrist, or you could put your hand out. One of like the sort of most brainstem responses to something coming at you is to put your hands in front of it. And so he could have had a wrist injury from that as well. In either case, if he has sprained the ligaments, the good news is he won't require a surgery. He'll probably be in some sort of brace in the early stages of that, then start doing range of motion exercises, simple things, rest, anti-inflammatories, ice, that kind of stuff. And to answer your question about whether it's going to impact him, look, if it's a wrist sprain, especially depending on which wrist, like are we talking about his top hand or bottom hand on the stick, I think either way it's probably unlikely. If you were to fracture it, then it's a different story. But the timeline, in my view, is too short for a fracture. And especially like with the way that the Habs have been managing these injuries generally, they've been pretty conservative. So I would be shocked to see them put a fracture of any kind back on the ice in 3 to 4 weeks. So yeah, I think we're probably more looking at a sprain.
Which brings us to David Reinbacher. And you mentioned limited information available. David Reinbacher's been out all season long, and very, very, very little information available on his injury, his surgery, his rehab. All we know is that he has been practicing with the Montreal Canadiens in a no-contact jersey. He went out to California with the team. So I guess that means that he's on track and will be back very soon. What are your thoughts about what he's been going through and his return to play?
Yeah, I mean, you would have thought that the guy getting hit by the car would be the most mysterious injury that we would have had, but this could have actually been the one. I remember watching that game and then seeing him leave the ice and say, what happened? And since then, I've watched the video probably 25 times. And here's what I see from that. So number one, we know he has a left knee injury. It was initially projected at about 5 to 6 months recovery time, which that was as of October. So he's about 4.5 months in now. He got hit from the side and fell onto his left knee, like directly onto his left knee, and it was flexed or even hyperflexed, you might say. And then all of a sudden he needs a surgery. Contrary to, a lot of the mechanisms that cause things like ACL and MCL tears, which is something so commonly we talk about in sport, especially with this team when it comes to knee injuries. My feeling is, given the 4 to 5 months now back on the ice, I wonder if he actually ended up tearing one of his menisci in his knee. We know he needed surgery, but it wasn't a quick return. Like, we're still talking about 4 months. So I doubt that they just went and would have had to like trim some sort of flap tear on the menisci. He may have actually needed a full repair or even an excision and repair of his meniscus in his knee. The only reason I say that is a combination of, one, the mechanism, and two, the recovery time. I think if it was his ACL, like a proper ACL tear requiring surgery, he would have been not yet practicing with the team in the way that he is. I mean, we didn't see Kirby do that. In addition to that, they often don't repair MCLs unless they're high-grade tears. And looking at that mechanism, I cannot think that was an MCL tear. Now, he has a history of MCL sprain, but on the other knee. So I don't think that obviously is relevant. And he also has this history of Osgood-Schlatter's disease, otherwise known as tibial apophysitis, which I don't think is any relation to this. So I think that for anyone that wants to look at him and say he's injury prone or he has knee problems, this is just, this is part of being a Hab. You get, unfortunately, coincidental injuries that are major in nature.
So I think Amy has a question about him returning at an intense time of year. I'm just going to make this general comment, and I think the reviews for the complete changeover of the medical staff have been pretty positive. And when the Habs trainer says we expect a player back at this time, they've been pretty accurate in their timeline. I think what we've noticed, or what I've noticed, I won't rope you guys into this, is that there's been a lot less information available on specific injuries or procedures, and I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not asking anybody to agree with me on that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Well, and I'll gladly say that I do agree with you. I appreciate the fact that their estimates for timeline for recovery have been pretty spot on so far. That gives me a lot of confidence in the abilities of the medical staff and the training staff. I think the little bit of all the mysteries that get created, they could probably work around a little bit better, but I digress. Related to David Rybacher, I just want to ask you, Dr. Morris, he should be getting ready to probably get back to practicing without a non-contact jersey on soon, which means he'll likely then, the next step after that, will be playing games again. And that will most likely happen in Laval in the AHL to get back into game conditioning, get back up to speed. But it's a very different situation down there right now than it is if he were just returning to the Montreal Canadiens. They're in the midst of a playoff hunt. They are in the top 3 teams of the entire American Hockey League. It is projected that they're going to go on a nice little run in the playoffs. And so do you believe that environment of a very competitive team that's probably going to go deep in the playoffs, does that set him up kind of for an ideal recovery situation and getting back into game action and getting back to game conditioning?
Yeah. Look, I think there's 2 things to think about, okay? So number 1 is that when we decide that you're clear, you're clear. So if we say, you're good to return to the game, I think that we can't look at that as like part of his recovery in a way. Like we're clearing him for action and he's good to go. So we're confident. We must be confident that he is outside of the scope of having a high probability of re-injury. Okay, so I think if they clear him, I would be happy for him to play. What we have to appreciate is this is where we need to be reasonable. Does he go back to being a 22-minute juggernaut, play all situations kind of guy? I wouldn't do that. I would think that they would want to manage his minutes closely and manage his usage for 2 reasons. One, just to get back to hockey. I mean, it's been so long for him as well. But also to build the confidence, and there's no need to rush things. They're doing so well without him. I mean, he would be a great addition, of course, and if he can work his way back in a rehabilitation, sort of active rehabilitation phase, that'd be great. But yeah, look, I would have no issue with him playing if they clear him. If they're happy with that and confident, then great. I think go for it. Go to the playoffs. All the games are supposed to be intense anyway. Like, I don't know that you're supposed to play the playoffs harder than you play the regular season. They should be putting 100% effort into most games. And they just need to manage his minutes probably going into it and just see. Do not drop him into 20 minutes. Just start slow and go from there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that brings us to Kaiden Guhle, and Kaiden Guhle has been maybe the Canadiens' top defenseman this year, certainly a leader on and off the ice. Kaiden Guhle, through his short NHL career, has had a number of injuries, but this one was a freak accident and a gruesome injury, and he has suffered a lacerated quadriceps muscle and has been deemed out indefinitely. So we're just going to turn the floor over to you, and you're welcome to go through what you've been able to gather and tell our listeners exactly what's going on with Kaiden Guhle.
Sure. So going off of what we can find, so we use official sources, of course, the Canadiens announcements, as well as the video, and then some auxiliary sources. So what we do know is that he has a lacerated quadricep, as you said, Rick. We know that he needed surgery for that, not surprisingly. And we know that he was stated to have been released quickly following the repair, which is a good sign. We know that they've claimed him to be out indefinitely, which I think is fair. And then we've gotten some sort of, I don't know whether you want to choose to believe it or not, information from other sources like the Tony Marino podcast about having a very nasty cut that was bleeding a lot, having a blue foot and screaming in pain and tourniquets and blood all over the stretcher. There was a lot of really grim commentary around it. From me looking at the video, what I can see there with Kaiden is he has, again, a flexion. He falls onto his right knee, and he has a flexion of the right knee. And you can see the left skate blade come and make contact with above the knee area, the thigh area above the knee, which we would call the medial aspect of that. So I think if we had to be as specific as possible, my guess would be that he's lacerated what's called the vastus medialis, which is when we talk about the quadricep, quad is referring to the four muscles of the thigh, and the vastus medialis is the one that's most inside the leg, if you want to put it. There may be an aspect of a laceration to the quad tendon as well. It's hard to say, obviously. It's possible given where the blade contacted him. It was really good. Rick actually pointed out to me that this was reviewed and discussed actually with one of the orthopods from the Anaheim Ducks team, Dr. Schultz, who was talking about how he didn't feel there was any major arterial involvement in that injury. And watching the video, I'm almost certain that that's the case. I would agree 100% with what he said. The femoral artery, which is the main artery supplying the knee, it traverses behind the knee, basically, or behind the leg, basically about halfway down your thigh. So it wouldn't be exposed to that skate blade being cut. Now, would he bleed? Of course, he would bleed, especially because, he has engorged muscle. It's hypervascularized from playing the game, and of course it's going to bleed. But I would actually be really surprised about that description from the Marinero podcast about like having a blue foot and so much blood and all that stuff, just because there's really not an arterial supply to be bleeding there. There are a couple things to consider with these types of injuries, and I just want to make this very clear, because having a lacerated muscle or tendon is different to tearing a muscle or tendon, fundamentally. There's two types of muscular injury. One is via indirect causes, one is versus direct causes. So Kaiden has a direct cause. He has a blade that cut his leg, which is very different to the muscle tearing under its own force. So eccentric forces, the stretching of the muscle under contraction, which is how guys like Braden Point or Derek Roy would be injuring their leg. So I've heard a lot of pundits talking about how it's similar to Derek Roy's injury, but it's not at all in my view, because they're totally different mechanisms and different aspects of the muscle being injured and the tendon being injured. We have to consider, of course, the depth of that laceration. Is it down to the bone, or is it an inch into the muscle? That's obviously going to have a huge part of how fast he comes back and how much function he loses and how much rehabilitation is required, and even what surgical approach they take, which of course then goes on to influence those things. Another important aspect is, did he involve tendon or not? We don't know that, but it's certainly possible. When they manage these injuries, there are two primary ways. One is to suture so basically stitch the muscle back together, which seems pretty obvious and simple. In some of the cases, they used a mesh as well to basically bridge the muscle together. Doesn't look like there's great evidence to support one way over the other, but I know that they can use those two approaches to do it. But really, we've never seen a case of a lacerated quadricep in hockey. I couldn't find anything about this. Tears, yes, but lacerations, no. If you look at previous tears, if you want to try to compare them like for like, we're looking at 4+ months of recovery time, depending on the severity of that tear. And one of the key things here, like I talk about whether it's muscle or tendon or both, and Dr. Scholl's, actually, his commentary pointed this out as well, which is it's very different to repair a tendon. Like to sew tendon to tendon is a different procedure than to sew muscle to muscle, and the muscle is so dynamic, right? It's contracting and relaxing, whereas the tendon is under tension but less dynamic than the muscle. So these tissues are harder to get together if it's just purely muscle, and can impact the recovery time. So before I go on to what we do know about lacerated quadriceps muscles and case studies on that, do you guys, Amy or Rick, do you have anything that you want to flag here, or questions about what we just talked about?
Well, listen, I know one thing that I forgot to do, and that was to warn people that they shouldn't be eating breakfast when they're listening to this particular podcast. Two things come to mind. One is if cut-proof socks or garments would have prevented something like this, and I'll just leave that out there. And secondly, I wondered if you could comment. The only really, we haven't heard from Guhle. We have heard from his agent, that is Lenoir. And first of all, as far as how he's dealing with this, Waugh said, Kaiden's in a good place mentally. Slowly, he's getting over it. It's not fun because it was a really freak accident. There's no date circled. He's going to take his time to get back to 100%. The agent goes on to say, as for the recovery, the big fear, everyone is a little worried about infection. So I'll leave you with those, and please go on and continue, and if just somewhere you can work in a response to those two things, we'd appreciate it.
Sure, no worries. Look, I'll go through one of the case studies, then I'll talk about potential complications, and we'll cover infection there, if that's all right, Rick. So there's a good case study which was from 2014 about a young athlete, 30 years old, who had a laceration of the quad. They were a soccer player, actually. It doesn't talk about the level of sport, but I think this is the closest we're going to get to be able to assess how does someone come back from an injury like this. So they did a great job, actually. So it was a 6-year follow-up of this case. Basically, this 30-year-old soccer player slices their leg in a similar way to Kaiden. It's a transverse cut of the quadricep, not in the exact same area, but pretty close. Within days of the repair, so he had a suture repair, no mesh involved. He was doing static exercises with that muscle and what we call isometric exercises. Within a week, he was doing passive flexion of that knee and working it through the range of motion to stretch the newly sewn together muscle. After 6 weeks, he was weight bearing. So we call that weight bearing as tolerated, meaning you can walk around without any support as long as you don't have too much pain. And within 3 months, he was actually back to his usual daily activities. Now, that doesn't mean high-level athletics, but we're talking, working his normal job, doing the laundry, cleaning the house, all these kinds of things. Overall, the post-operative outcomes were very favorable. And at 6 years follow-up, he reported to have total return to pre-injury activity levels without any re-ruptures, no new injuries. And on functional testing, like looking at the actual strength of the muscle compared to the other one, which wasn't cut, there was no significant difference in the muscle shape or symmetry. And there was just a minor strength deficit reported of about 14% in the injured leg compared to the uninjured leg. There were similar outcomes in 2021 from a 22-year-old who had a mesh repair instead of pure suturing. But on the whole, you're seeing this recovery time of, probably something like 3 to 4 months. But then you have to add that professional athlete factor onto it, and I think that's really where things will get pushed out. My general look at this is that I think he may even be back on the ice in 3 or 4 months. He could be, depending on the depth. If we're talking about a serious laceration, and if any of what we were told about the grim nature of this cut was true, then we're probably looking at 3 to 4 months timeline. Is probably a significant laceration. But then you have to add on the fact that this guy's got to get back to the level of a pro athlete. And because of that, I just don't see him back playing games for the Montreal Canadiens in the absence of this being a much more shallow cut than we all think. You have to think about the complications, and here's where I'll touch on infection, Rick. So we have to remember that, after all of this, we are going to have issues with reduced strength, muscle activation, scar tissue at the site. And we're talking about a major, major muscle group for a hockey player, right? Regarding infection, look, when you have surgery, when you have a surgery, any surgery, whether it's your appendix, whether it's this quadricep tear, we always give antibiotics prior to the surgery at the time of the cut. So we usually would use something like a cefazolin IV as a dose before the surgery to limit the chance of infection. The most common infections you get with surgery of these areas would be skin flora, so bugs that live on the skin, staph or strep. And what we do is we use that antibiotic to mitigate the risk. Now, overall, post-operative infection rates are pretty low, very low in the first world, and probably even lower with the type of facilities that Kaiden has access to and surgeons that Kaiden has access to. It's always there, though, no matter what. The risk is there. You have bacteria from the skin entering into that area with the cut, and it's always going to be a risk. But, until something changes, I'm sure they're worried about it, but the chances are much, much more in favor that this is not going to be a problem. So unless something changes, I think we just wait and watch that space.
Well, that's all very enlightening and comprehensive, and I think an amazing inside look at your world and how it relates to the world of the Montreal Canadiens. We should say, I don't think we said at the beginning, but it should be obvious by now that you are an avid fan, an avid follower of the Montreal Canadiens. How about we ask you a fan question? And
love it.
And if you can just, where are you in the spectrum? Would you want the Kent Hughes to be a buyer at the trade deadline that's coming up, a seller, some sort of hybrid? What are your expectations for the rest of this Montreal Canadiens season?
Wow. I was very prepared for this podcast, but not for that. Wow, this is a really important question. Look, I think that the way that we're going now, we have a lot of pieces coming in next year, okay? And the forwards hopefully will look different next year. My big problem with this team is at two positions. One is center and one is right defense. I don't know about my level of confidence for our right defense to look significantly different next season. And I just think we have too many players who are lefties playing on the right. And I don't think it's conducive to winning at a high level. I think ultimately they probably do need to do, I would call it maybe shuffling, they need to shuffle a left defenseman, some of these extra left defensemen out for someone with a right-handed stick that can play at the similar level. Just like, bringing in probably something a little bit more high-end than Alex Carrier, but, I don't think they have to go out and get Noah Dobson, which is something that's come up recently in the last 48 hours. At center, I think the same thing. So look, they also need to make space for Demidov. I mean, where do you put this guy when he comes here? He's probably the highest octane offensive player they're going to have. And if he's not on the first power play, to me, it's a crime. So you have to make space for these guys. You're going to have to move people who you're attached to or change people in the lineup who you're attached to. See Uri Slafkovsky. And it's going to be tricky, but I don't think they should be seller. I don't think they should be a buyer. I just think they should shuffle their deck, change the hand a little bit.
And see that? You've got top-notch medical analysis and top-notch fan analysis as well. Best of both worlds.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, but I knew you could handle it.
Thanks.
Well, we want to thank you once again, Dr. Stephen Morris, our medical consultant here at Rocket Sports Media and the Canadiens Connection podcast. As always, a wealth of knowledge and just sheds entirely new light on situations with some very serious injuries that regular folks like a lot of our listeners and like me and like Rick would not even be able to begin to discuss with such intelligence and knowledge. So, Dr. Morris, thank you so much for being here. We can't wait to have you back again soon.
It's a pleasure, Amy. Thanks so much.
That was great. Thank you again, Dr. Stephen Morris, Doc Morris, and he's part of the Rocket Sports team, and we talk to him regularly on our internal Slack group, and it's always fun and informative when we have him on the podcast, and we'll have him back soon. Just to add to our discussion, Elliot Friedman on his 32 Thoughts mentioned the injury situation with the Montreal Canadiens, and he said, quote, hated to see Kaiden Guhle's skate cut put him out. He's suffered enough injuries. The details were gruesome, just a disgusting injury. A gentle reminder, wear the cut-resistant gear underneath the socks too, end quote. That from Elliot Friedman. So thanks Stephen. Thanks, Dr. Morris. Where can people find him if they're looking to follow him?
You can find Dr. Morris on Twitter or X, if you're calling it that, at Doc Morris MD. That's at Doc DOC Morris MORRIS MD. Give him a follow. He's a very fun follow on the Twitters, and always a wealth of knowledge and information. So thank you very much.
And you got a question for Doc Morris? You can use our text line 5853 Rocket, and we'll when we have him back, we'll certainly have him address any questions or comments you have.
Speaking of questions, that brings us to this week's Canadiens Connection question of the week. Are injuries and lack of depth the reason for the Habs' recent slide, or is it fatigue? Or, this is kind of a three-prong. It's like a multiple choice. Reasons for the Habs' recent slide. Do you think it's injuries and lack of depth? Do you think it's fatigue? Or, behind door 3, are the Habs just not ready for the playoffs? Could be any one of those things, could be a combination of those things, but what do you think is the reason for why things have suddenly gone sideways once again for the Montreal Canadiens? Send us a text, 5853 Rocket. Drop us a comment on YouTube or drop us a comment on social media at Habs Connection. All right, we are going to take our second break here on the show. This time, DraftKings has a very brand new Super Bowl incentive for you for DraftKings Sportsbook, their original sports betting app, and a great incentive just for the Super Bowl and just for you, our Canadiens Connection listeners. So check that out. Be sure to download and sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook and DraftKings Pick 6. And on the other side of this break, we're reading your responses to last week's Canadiens Connection question of the week. So stick around. You're listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast right here on Rocket Sports Radio. This ain't the little itty bitty teeny tiny bowl. This is Super Bowl 59. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 59. Scoring touchdowns is key to hoisting the Vince Lombardi Trophy, and you have a shot to score big by betting on them at DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas, 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. New customers only. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. And welcome back to episode 334 of the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio. Don't forget to follow us at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also follow us on YouTube. Subscribe there. You can find that InsideTheCanadiens.com. And don't forget to text us anytime at the Rocket Sports text line, 585-3-ROCKET. When you do, you might hear us read your comment or question or your answer to our weekly Canadiens Connection question to our viewers and listeners, just like we're going to do right now. So, but before we do that, let me just remind you one more time of what this week's question is so that you can start thinking about how you want to reply. It's kind of a multiple choice question. The Habs are in the middle of a big old slide once again after having such a successful December and early January. So what do you think the reason is for that? Is it injuries and lack of depth? Is it fatigue? Or are the Habs just not ready for the playoffs? Plain and simple. Let us know, and we're going to read your best responses next week on the show. Now, last week we asked you, what can Marty St. Louis do over the next 5 games to help boost the Canadiens' playoff chances? Remember, when we met a week ago, this was as St. Louis was saying, this was the chase to the Four Nations break. There were 5 games that were going to take place, and they were 5 games with a lot of really important points on the table to kind of get themselves back on steady ground and maybe get themselves back into the talk for the wild card spot in the playoff race. So we were asking, what can St. Louis do over these next 5 games to help boost the Canadiens' playoff chances? And Rick, I think I'm going to let you start because I believe you have an email.
We welcome emails as well to our email address, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com. If you have a little bit more to say, use the email address, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com. This one comes from Dino, a frequent loyal listener, and from the Ottawa Gatineau area. Dino says, Salut bien, another Lombardi Championship game, another weekend hockey doubleheader for CH. Football is king. The NHL knows better than to compete with the NFL. As for the CH, it looks like another front row seat at the bingo hall. In other words, still not good enough in all aspects of the game. They've made gains, but still not there yet. Team chemistry, leadership, grit, coaching, just some of the departments that need nursing. Got to make room for some of our younger ones too. Pray we don't panic and give up on our development plans. And remember, with the trade deadline maneuvers heating up, the best trade is often the one we don't make. P.S. Sunday's matchup's going to be a cracker. Thriller for sure. Philly versus the Chiefs, take 2 from your dear friend Dino. So thanks, Dino. Great comment there.
I'm actually going to give a stick tap to Dino as well. He sent an email to me as well. This is I'll give him a ton of credit. Dino is a Cowboys fan, and he wished me an Eagles fan.
Oh boy!
Good luck to my team in the Super Bowl this weekend, and that I give him full credit for because that doesn't happen often in that rivalry. So Dino, thank you very much. We'll definitely be watching. Hopefully they can lift up that Lombardi trophy. Switching over to YouTube now, we have a comment from @Habinations. He says, I'm going to give an odd opinion about the Habs, if I may. The team went on a run. The team was playing above its head, playing the system to perfection. 2 of its main hubs of production, Guhle and Heineman, got hurt. The team didn't add anything, but losing 2 key players is not replaceable with more time on the ice for Jack-Eye and Pezzetta. If the Habs made a trade when Heineman got hurt, they might have survived the loss in talent. They didn't, so they didn't. The break can't come soon enough to heal the wounded. Go Habs, go. I think it's a very astute comment and observation.
This one on YouTube from @FrankHuber9912. It's Thursday, and the Habs are halfway between a wild card and a top 5 pick in the draft, and trending in the wrong direction. If anyone is still hoping the Habs would send the Leafs to the golf course again, I suppose Marty could try lacing up the skates and start playing like he did in his prime. Is LeCavalier still on the payroll? The point, I suppose, is that we're all out of conventional solutions. So, roll the dice. Replace Guhle and Heineman with Beck and Mailloux. Put Dvorak, Slafkovsky, and Doc on a line and drastically cut their ice time. But line up top. Newhook and Beck center the other two lines. And finally, play Pez a lot. If my genius fails to pay dividends, I like the guy. I think that's obvious that Frank loves some Pezzetta.
I think he does. That's a great comment. I like it. She _26 back in the comments again. Always fun to hear from her. She says, "Oh, geez, Matheson's cocky comment. Ha, ha, ha." Well, regarding our prospects, yay Fowler. He's been killing it. I watched Volokin's highlights, and good for him. Demidov, what can you say other than amazing as usual? Laval's been killing it too. I love watching the Laval highlights. They're an exciting team, and I'm happy for Primo. Kudos to Pascal Vincent. Wish we had him coaching the Habs. I'm not buying the fatigue excuse. I watched both Cole and Lane, meaning Lane Hudson, being asked by the press about fatigue, and both said they were feeling great. Also, Lane said he attends every optional skate. Both also said they were excited and looking forward to playing more hockey. Yet there's MSL saying it's fatigue. Haha. There's an excuse. There's always an excuse. Always. Oh man, you played the MSL juice presser. I saw that and it was hilarious. The question of the week. Remember, this.
What can Marty do?
She has an easy answer. She says, I have an easy answer to the question of the week. This is, what can Marty St. Louis do over the next 5 games to improve the Canadiens' playoff chances? And her answer, leave.
Doesn't like Marty.
She doesn't like Marty. She says, it seems like forever since I've had a chance to comment, and I've missed having the time to listen to an entire episode. Schoolwork, homework, studying, etc. have all been on overload these last few weeks. I think I'm suffering from fatigue. Thank you both for my much needed One Nation break. Awesome work as usual. Thank you very much, She26. Yes, schoolwork and homework has to come first. But it's great to know we have listeners from all age groups. We really do. And obviously, She26 is one of our younger listeners. She has schoolwork and homework to take care of. But she makes sure that she makes time for the Canadiens Connection podcast whenever she can squeeze it in. So we appreciate that as always. So the Canadiens, we've said it many times, have 2 games this weekend, both 1 o'clock starts, both in the Bell Center, playing the Devils and then the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then it's resting time for the NHL. The 4 Nation break officially goes into effect this week. And the game action, even though the Habs will be resting, the Bell Center will not, because the Bell Center will be the first venue to play host to the 4 Nations tournament. That kicks off with Canada versus Sweden on the 12th. And then on the 13th, Team USA will be there playing Finland. So both of those games on back-to-back days this week should be exciting. Should be a little bit of intense rivalry action going on. And it'll be fun to watch. That all leads us up to the very next episode of the Canadiens Connection podcast, which will be on Saturday, February 15th, right here. So in between the 4 Nations break, the start of the 4 Nations tournament and our next Canadiens Connection podcast on the 15th, wishing all of you a happy Valentine's Day. On the 14th,
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to all of you. And we just can't wait to get back and start talking about some international hockey play, as well as what the Canadiens can manage to do in these last 2 games before their break. It's going to be exciting. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure you're subscribed to the podcast. We never want you to miss an episode. And be sure you're back here again next Saturday for another fun episode of the Canadiens Connection podcast right here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Click subscribe so you never miss an episode of Canadiens Connection. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @Rocket Sports.